decide. I'm not going to introduce my guests. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because I think it's important that they get to decide who they are today and what they're bringing to this particular party. So, without further ado,
Hi, so I'm Gaynor and I'm the ISVA Service Manager for We Are Survivors. I won't tell you what on ISVA is because we'll get into that a little bit later on.
100% you will.
Okay.
Very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a little nervous because it's the first time we're speaking at this type of event. So before I introduce myself, there's just two things I really want to say. Just like Duncan, this is my first time in the Eagle, which is ironic, being a gay man living in Manchester. But the reason it's my first time is you would have caught me doing the most in the dark room, but I used to be on that many drugs, I would have even made it past the bouncers and down the stairs. So that's why it's my first time in the Eagle. And secondly, I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to everybody that spoke on this stage before us. Thank you to all of you buying a ticket and supporting this today. And yeah, thank you for allowing me to be here on this stage. So yeah, I realised I've not introduced myself. So my name is Lee, and I am a survivor of rape and sexual assault. I'm also a recovered addict. And yeah, despite all of those things, let's not get it twisted, I absolutely loved going to chemsex parties and experiencing that lifestyle, so that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today and around consent. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon everybody, I'm Janet Potter. I'm the Chief Crime Prosecutor for the North West. So my team covers the whole of Cumbria, Lancashire and Greater Manchester. And we have a specialist team called the Brasso team, Rape and Serious Sexual Offence team, who purely deal with offences of rape and serious sexual offences, involving all types of victims across all ages, all sexualities, all communities, all ethnicities, all faiths. And we make decisions on whether to prosecute offenders for the offences that are alleged against them after the police have conducted their investigation. And we then, if the decision is to charge, we then take those cases through the court for the court to make an adjudication on whether somebody is guilty or not. It's my first time in the Eagle as well, can I say? And I also say a big thank you to We Are Survivors for inviting me to be here. It's a real privilege.
Remarkably, nobody's lying here about being their first time in the Eagle. Lee, sweet summer child, came up to the stage earlier and said, "God, this sofa's really high off the ground." I thought, "Oh, what do you want, mate?" What an interesting observation. It's probably the first time anyone sober has ever seen a nun in the Eagle.
We're always down here.
Oh, yeah. It does feel a bit like the start to quite a bad joke. You know, nun and a priest walk into the Eagle. Priest looks at the nun and says, "Sister, it is not a silent night, but it is a holy one."
We're always on our knees down here.
Brings me to my first sort of general question, what I kind of want to open on, which is about consent within venues, because we're in this lovely space right here. This is an environment that people walk into expecting a certain kind of thing and get a certain kind of thing out of it. With consent, there's a lot of difficulty about continued consent, about when I open up the door to something and that something changes, that experience I think that I've invited in changes around me. What role do I have? What right do I have? Gaynor, do you think there's more that we could be doing about presenting conversations about consent, or making people aware of organisations or available services within the village or other places?
I love a poster. I love a poster. Posters. As a woman going into a women's toilet, that, you know, with posters on the back of the door, these little tabs we can take off, you know, go here for sport, go there for sport. It's actually not my first time in the Eagle.
I know that.
I've been around a bit. So, what I'd like to say is just getting that message out there. Just get it up, not only in toilets, because that, again, it's stigmatising, it's secret, it's hid away. I think we just need a big push on getting that message out, by any means necessary, opposed to being a good start.
No, it's interesting as well to see, I mean, not that I've been in that many women's toilets, but the lack of the sort of the tear-off number or that information, that people just keep trying to sell me Viagra and it's starting to feel personal. I'd much rather some other information about consent be available in the space as well. Janet, do you feel like there's a difficulty potentially about when we talk about consent? Certainly you're coming in obviously from a legal perspective. Is there a difference between the law's view of what consent is and the living experiences of what consent has to look like in a space like this or in a chemsex party? Is there a gap?
I don't think there is a gap. I think the law is quite clear about what consent means. I mean, there's a poster there that says yes means yes, and that's obviously, you know, if you say yes, you're consenting, you're going along with it. If there reaches a point where you no longer consent and you want it to stop, everybody has the right to say, no, it's time to stop. And if somebody carries on beyond that with the sexual activity, then it becomes an offence, because the offence is that you are having sexual activity with somebody who doesn't consent and you reasonably believe that they're not consenting, but you're carrying on. There's a little bit more to it than that, because obviously there are some situations where you no longer have the freedom and capacity to consent. And if the person no longer has the freedom and capacity to consent, and sexual activity takes place, then that is an offence. So if, I'll use the word complainant, because we use the word complainant as suspect at the point before somebody's charged. If a complainant is unconscious, whether that be because they're asleep, because they're intoxicated through drink or drugs, and somebody has sex with them, they haven't got the capacity to consent. And the person will know they haven't got the capacity because they're out of their count. You know, it's like how you can consent to anything. And there's a little video about somebody bringing a cup of tea to somebody who's asleep. You can't consent even to have a cup of tea if you're asleep. So, you know, that situation, which may be very relevant in the circumstances and context that we're talking about today, means, you know, that you're not consenting. You've not said anything, you're silent because you're unconscious, but you haven't consented. There's also that situation where people are in fear or have been threatened or subject to violence. They haven't got the freedom to consent. Yeah. So that too can be a situation where an offence is committed because the suspect has inflicted fear or violence upon the complainant such that they no longer have the freedom to actually consent. So there's a number of aspects to it, but I think we would all understand those to be the ordinary meaning of the word consent, and that plays through into the legalities. Yeah,
no, it's something that's interesting as well with the language that we use around yes means yes. That consent is something that's given, not withdrawn. When you look at the sort of the history of, okay, I'm going to talk about Latin, but unlike usually when Latin comes up here, it's not going to be Sean Paul or Pitbull. It's going to be the boring Latin of the Romans, okay? So the etymology, the sort of origins behind the word consent, the first part comes from com, C-O-M, excuse my accent, it sounded a bit different. If I was from up in Newcastle, if I said com, you might be something different. But com means it's like company, it's togetherness, it's group. And then I think it's sentire or sensire, which means feeling. So it's together feeling is how the original word came together. And then over the centuries it changed to being about consent was something that when you gave consent, it meant that you gave consent and permission for your rights to be taken away. So the legal language around the word changed at some point. It's really interesting. Lee, I was wondering if you feel comfortable talking about this. How is consent maintained within chemsex spaces? Because it's not like there's a butler or a DJ or a major domo. It's not Butlins, right? You know, someone's not, you know, spotting from the table and being like, oh yes, that one's what a rubber duck. Someone's going to make sure everyone has an individual relationship with the situation that they're in. So what does that kind of look like within that kind of space?
That's a difficult question, but in simple terms, I think consent is all around communication. So there's this stigma that, you know, when you're intoxicated, that you're communicating from a different headspace, which to some extent is true. However, the way I believe it, if you're still able to string your sentences together enough to be able to comprehend a question as simple as, do you want to engage in sex? Do you want to fuck? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And you're able to respond with a yes, then, and the person that's also asking you is in the right frame of mind, that, you know, that you feel comfortable enough to be able to say yes and engage safely in sex with that person. It's mutually, there's a mutual understanding, and it's about maintaining safety. Because, you know, in a chemsex setting, it can be a very unsafe setting. You're on some very hard drugs with a group of strangers that you don't know, with, you know, with the idea that you're going to be taking your clothes off and sex is going to be happening. But just because you've gone to a party and you've consented to taking those drugs does not automatically mean that you're consenting to have sex with people in that space. It can be given and withdrawn at any time. And I think it is all about communication. So I don't mind sharing a little bit about my experience. I went to loads of chemsex parties and I enjoyed them all bar the one time. And the one time I didn't enjoy it. Some were better than others, some I was more high than other times, there was a different bunch of people, sometimes the same people, but all of them felt safe because I was managing my own safety, because I was conscious, I was awake, I was able to respond, I was able to leave if I wanted to, but the one time that it deeply affected me in a really traumatic way was when consent wasn't present, because I passed out and I was at a party 4 years ago. And there was a clown to the left of me, a joker to the right. I was stuck in the middle with Gina, Tina and Kendrick, if you know, you know. And I had clothes on, blacked out, passed out. I'm not able to answer any questions. I'm not able to say, yes, I'd like to do that. I'm also not able to say, stop, I don't want you to continue doing that. Hours later, I wake up, no clothes on, with the guy who'd been rejecting all night, assaulting me sexually. I don't know what's going through my head. Panic, fear, intoxication, confusion. I stand up, I try and gather my things, I go to the door, and I say thank you for having me to my perpetrator. And then I leave. And then I'm thinking, how has it gone from A to B? How have I got from this situation to that? Is it my fault? Is it the drugs? Is it this whole whirlwind of thing? It was as simple as what that poster is. I couldn't say yeah, I also couldn't say stop. And somebody said before, I'm not too sure who this gentleman is, but it was really poignant, that somebody wrote on the back of their friend's back, if asleep, don't fuck. I wish that was wrote on the back of my back, but even if it was wrote on the back of my back, it doesn't mean that makes no difference. Yes, no, nodding your head. It makes no difference at all. But also I think it raises some really important questions as to in what space are we operating where we have to write that on someone's back. So that's a little bit of my experience, but yeah, I think there's more questions that can come out of that.
No, really, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Is there a danger as well that because of the kind of spaces, the chemsex spaces that people are engaged in, that you feel like there may be quite obvious barriers to why people don't come forward or struggle to come forward when consent isn't present or taken away? Do you want to start us off, Kennedy?
We've already spoke about the sex, that there's stigma and shame surrounding sex. So if you're talking about sex and chems and how that's kind of done, not in secret, if you know, like Lee said. But then too, there's barriers anyway for males coming forward to get support. So there's just layers, isn't there? There's layers to that. There's layers to it. So barriers become, I suppose, harder to break down.
It's compounded. I mean, there's shame, there's stigma, there's fear, there's historical relationships between the gay community and police. There's a lot of things that's working in one direction.
Yeah. So my role as an ISVA, Independent Sexual Violence Advisor, is it's our role to support somebody if they're considering reporting something to the police. If they do decide to report something to the police, then we're there every step of the way to support and help them. So, the journey isn't, they're not having to do that journey alone. Like you said, there's stigma around talking to the police, especially because there's drugs involved, and people's first thought is, well shit, I was taking loads of drugs that night, you know what I mean? Am I going to be blamed? So all these myths and stereotypes come into it. getting into support and stepping through that door, we can help to kind of to blow those missing stereotypes out the water, really. But you don't know unless there's somebody there telling you, it's okay, you're not going to be judged, and we definitely don't judge.
Yeah, no, and certainly something I want to talk to you in a moment, Lee, about your experiences of the reporting process. But Janet, to use your language from earlier, when you're talking about sort of complainants and suspects, obviously there comes a point where that becomes victims and defendants. But a lot of people who go through non-consensual experiences can sometimes feel like the justice system may be victimising them, or they may be a victim of another uncontrollable process which makes them feel small. Is there more that can be done to sort of assuage those fears about what kind of crimes the CPS will focus on or will actually prosecute? I'm not asking for a get out of jail free card here. You're a naughty party George Proctor, but more specifically, that if someone is a victim and loses their consent in a chemsex space, that they might not need to fear coming forward so much because of what actually else is going on here.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that and I can't speak for GMP, but certainly the CPS would be focusing on the serious offence, and the serious offence here is the rape or the sexual assault. And so that's what my prosecutors will focus on. There are many complainants who come forward from every walk of life who, for one reason or another, when they're providing an account to the police, sort of blame themselves because they were drunk or they were under the influence of drugs. That's quite common. And the reason it's quite common is because I'm afraid a lot of the suspects are predators who are looking for people who are made vulnerable through drink or drugs. So it's not unusual that a lot of the complainants that we deal with are people who have found themselves intoxicated and therefore vulnerable and not in a position to consent. But we will be looking at the evidence concerning the rape or the sexual offence. We will be looking at what the complainant says about that, and what we're looking for is, have we sufficient evidence that if we put this case before the court, there is a realistic prospect of conviction. So a jury are more likely than not to accept what the complainant says and convict the defendant. And if the complainant comes forward and they're credible and they give a warts and all truthful story, the likelihood is the jury will accept what they say. It's when people try and I understand why they do it, but people say, no, I didn't take any drugs, or no, I only had 2 small glasses of beer, and then when they go to the SARC, it's obvious that they've had, a lot more, and then their evidence starts to become a little bit discredited. So, provided people are truthful, warts and all, tell the story, the likelihood is there will be sufficient credible evidence to put before a court which a jury will understand, and there's a realistic prospect of conviction.
And you're also talking about public interest as well.
Yeah, the public interest in prosecuting rape and sexual offences is right up there. So, if we've got the evidence, we're always going to prosecute unless, the suspect, for example, isn't fit enough to stand trial.
Yeah, I understand. And Lee, does that sort of align with your experiences of reporting? What was reporting like for you?
I'm going to be honest, reporting was really fucking scary, excuse my language, but without any ego, it's fine. From what I hear, allegedly, it was really scary to report, and I think I'm just going to talk from my experience. It's scary to come forward as a male, as a survivor anyway, because we're conditioned as men in society, and it isn't to take away from our female, they, them, counterparts, any other human being, but I can only talk my experience as a male, a gay male survivor. It's difficult to come forward anyway because we're conditioned, we don't talk about our mental health issues, we don't talk, we're struggling, just man up, bottle up. So there's all these, even just speaking out, let alone to a police officer or to an ISFA, it's scary. However, I found that reporting to the police via an ISFA wasn't half as scary as what actually happened. I'm going to be honest. Yeah, okay, you have to speak about it, you might have to relive it if it goes to trial, you might have to talk about it loads in therapy. However, it's not going to change that took place and that happened to me. But the reason why I reported, and then I'll talk a little bit about the journey of that, was, justice looks like different things to different people. Sometimes justice is that their perpetrator is going to be behind bars, or that a whole new law has been changed, like let's Claire's Law example, or something like that. For me, why I reported was, and I'll share this because I don't mind, we're talking about some serious stuff. You know, I was a survivor of childhood rape when I was 11, and that happened in America. I didn't tell anyone for 15 years. And from a CPS point of view, that had no paper trail. Anyway, if I was to do a historical report in case it happened in America, no police in America were made aware, you know, it's a family member, blah, 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 fine. Then I said, I didn't think being, you know, raped as a child that I would experience sexual assault as an adult. I thought, I've had my fair share, you know, one time's too many, but tip, done, that bit, done in my life, it won't happen again. But this is a scary thing, a very real thing, is that it can happen to anyone at any time, at any point in your life, and it can happen multiple times in various different forms. And it just happened that, you know, I was at that one, like I said, sex party, passed out, was sexually assaulted. And I used the word rape and I used the word sexual assault in this context because I want to be very clear about the difference. However, I reported because for me, the justice was, as long as I go on record having said that this person did this to me, then no matter what happens from a CPS point of view, like trial investigation, that's not my job, that's the police's job. That's the criminal justice job. My job is just to say what happened to me and own my story and my narrative. By doing that, at least it's on record that I said this person assaulted me. So if somebody else comes forward later down the line to say that this person has assaulted them, there's a record that this person assaults people sexually. That's my justice. I'm being able to share that today. I don't know if I've gone off on a tangent. I have really bad ADHD. I'm just apologising now. So, thank you.
So we're talking about consent. And I did mention, I did try not to intimidate anyone too much earlier. There would be some audience participation. But it's just the same as before. I'm going to run around with the microphone. So get your questions ready. Like I said, write them down or put your hand up. But I want to know what consent means to you, or I want to know what you want to ask our lovely guests. We've got a good range of experiences here, either experts in their own experiences, or those who have helped support the law and bring back consent into a space where consent has been lost. You know, as a victim myself of the time that Shazza Pierce burnt down my van. I want to know what you think, so I'm going to dance around. So put your hands up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very grey area when we talk about this sort of movement where you've got consent to go to a party and what happens there. But I think we miss the point that there are nuances within chemsex parties as well, and it's so broad. Where I first got sucked into that world was as a much younger person, and it was predatory. It was totally predatory. And I, as somebody who'd grown up with internalised homophobia, self-loathing, for the first time in my life I felt part of something, and these people, on the face of it, seemed like they were making me feel part of it. So if I was out for the evening and then they enabled me to get high, but I was still aware of what was happening, I went to their house or to their party knowing exactly what was going to happen. But these people who took charge of the dosing and whatever, obviously as a sober looking down at it, I wouldn't want those things to happen. But where do you think that line of consent crossed? Because I get what you said about if somebody's not in a position to give that consent. But I went to that premises while still in a position to give consent, and I kind of would have known what was going to happen. It's only the next day that I was kind of reminded with videos and things what actually did happen. And I think that's a grey area, and I think we have to understand, as I say, within chemsex parties where people say, oh, it's a lot of fun, it's quite often for some people to have fun, others have to have a night they don't remember, and then a few days after where they're full of just feeling awful. So thank you, sorry long winded.
So I'm trying to understand the question. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. But I think in terms of consent, you mentioned dosage. One thing that I found is that, and this was just a practice of my own, so I was using drugs for years before I even went to sex parties, is that obviously anyone that's been to them or anyone that's taken G knows about, and it was spoke about before, particularly, you're dosing things correctly with G, because there's a very fine line between, overdose, passing out, coma, and death. So, I guess for me, in terms of the chems, I was consenting, I had control over my own usage when I was dosing everything myself. In this instance that I shared from my story, that was the one time in my whole chemsex experience that I let someone else dose for me, and that's what happened that one time. Could have been different, nothing, someone might have dosed me, I'd taken it and nothing had happened, where I wasn't assaulted. So I think it's about taking, you're intoxicated, so how much is anyone really in control when they're intoxicated? However, if you're a regular drug user at these things, you have, I was very aware of my tolerance and how far I could take it with certain chemicals, so I guess I felt like I was keeping myself safe and able to put myself in situations to consent, because I was controlling as much of my own experience as I possibly could. Things went wrong when the control was taken out of my hands through me accepting a dose of someone else and then them taking control of me when I was passed out. I don't know if I really answered the question with that, but I just think it's worth noting that I think we all have this is one thing that I've seen a lot at chemsex parties, and it's actually quite sad, and it takes away, I guess, from the fun aspects of, there is some people that go to these parties and they take drugs safely and they consent to sex every time and they're having really enjoyable sex and things like that. And I'm not here today to say that every person that will go to a chemsex party is going to overdose and or get sexually assaulted. That's not the case. But like why we're having this event today, we're just a miscommunication. We're just a terminology or a mil away from those things happening without having the appropriate conversations and things like that, and also a collective unity of looking out for each other. I was always raised you never leave a brother or sister down, a person down. If someone's in a bad way in a nightclub, people be picking them up off the floor, giving them water, bouncers be intervening, checking that they're okay. Different at chemsex parties. There was a time once, I don't mind sharing, there was a guy who was in a bad way, and I could tell he was in a bad way, so I stopped having sex with some other people, give this guy some water, put a blanket on him, and I just stayed there listening to his breath to make sure he wasn't about to slip into a coma. Everyone else carried on having sex. It's not to judge them, they were high, they probably didn't even know. But it's in those situations, and if you're not going to those chemsex parties now that your friends still are, check in with them. Are they okay? How's your usage? How's your sexual health? How's your engagement? Do you know to spot signs of overdose? Do you know when, usually if something feels not right, it's usually not right in those situations. I've probably gone off on a tangent.
No, it's true. You're talking about checking in.
I just want to say thank you for everybody that's came to today from lived experience, because the bravery to sit where you guys are sitting in front of everyone, it's honestly just had me goosies, it's really, and I work as a psychologist, but every single time you hear someone's lived experience, it's almost a privilege to hear your experience with you in such a raw way, because what it must take to sort of speak on it. But I want to think about capacity. Part of psychology, sometimes we do capacity assessments, and so people have the right to make a bad decision, and so do they have capacity, do they have financial capacity, do they have capacity in sort of all different ways? And it's such a, grey area in where is capacity, where is consent, when we think about lived experiences trauma, of mental health difficulties. And I think in my experience that's where some of the blame maybe comes in, is that people think, I was here and I shouldn't have been there and that's on me. But if capacity is such a fluid thing and consent is as well, we need to address what happened before that we don't even notice sometimes. I think that's a really important thing to hold in mind to validate people. But my question was for you, Lee, if that's okay. Not to come in.
I consent to that question. I think you've not asked it yet. I can change my mind a bit for the consent.
There we go. It was just about, do you have any reflection on what's been able to help you to discuss this experience from friends, professionals, like arts, any services, communications? Was there anything that sticks out that was helpful for you to be able to discuss this and see it in a slightly less, maybe layman way? You don't have to answer this if it feels too much, which is really interesting.
No, I'll go there. Nothing's too much. Literally, when you've lived this sort of stuff, like, this is easy in comparison to that, even though I was nervous. What helped me? A multitude of things, to be honest. Talking was one of the big ones. I think two things that survivors across the board, and I don't want to speak for every survivor, but I feel like this would resonate, want to hear these two things. And it's one, I believe what you're telling me, and two, it isn't your fault. So they're important, because I want to be believed, because I'm not making this shit up. And from my experience, you know, I used drugs for 22 years and I talked some shit for 22 years. So most of the things that come out of my mouth was waffle, but when it was something serious like this, then you really want to be believed, because it not only validates my experience, which it don't matter if every one of you didn't believe I know what happened to me. My trauma knows, my therapist knows, like the life that I've lived, my 12-step program knows. So like for me, the help I got, I just feel really blessed that I'm able to be sat alive today, because the way I processed my trauma for years, or not processed, was to escape by using drugs, alcohol, sex, people, places, things, because I needed an artificial dopamine hit always, because I was unable to sit with myself and feel the pain that I felt. And we have to go through these painful experiences in order to heal from them. And healing's a journey, it's ongoing, but things that help me, We Are Survivors charity that's in Manchester, a part of who's here today, they quite literally saved my life before I got clean from the drugs. And I use the word clean, I know it's been spoken about today, and it's not because I viewed my former life as dirty, it's just in a drug sense. I like that, because some of the drugs I were taking weren't clean, they were definitely cut with all sorts, like, you know, I smoked cheese at one point off the floor thinking it was leftover crap. I don't recommend it. And what Walker's salt and vinegar, that's also not nice to smoke either. But what I'd say is, yeah, so I engaged with We Are Survivors. I got one, so if you're not sure who we are, I'll just tell you a little bit. I engaged with them. I got one-to-one psychosexual therapy at EMDR, I always get them wrong. Do you know what, I'm running out of letters in the alphabet. LGBT, EDMR, GHB, ADHD. Like, honestly. But yeah, I engaged with them. And then, you know, I started breaking my silence slowly. And then when this happened, I reported with an ISFA. And so, like, Gaina's team, Daniel, who was on the stage, who's helped organise this, was my ISFA. So shout out to Daniel, thank you. But I had no idea, and I'd sat in rooms full of survivors before who talked about their stories, to do, you know, share their stories, going through the CPS journey and things like that. And so I sort of understood it, but then once I was in it and I reported, I still didn't understand. Having an ISFA there really helped me, and it was collaborative. With the police, it really was. The police get a bad rep, but mine were great. It was collaborative. When you're a survivor, your choice has been taken away. Your choice to consent, your choices. I was given choices. I didn't have to give a statement right away if I didn't feel comfortable. I was informed at every single part of the process. And another thing as well, I just want to mention this so I don't forget, because I did want to mention this today. I actually went to more chemsex parties after I was assaulted that one time. And to anyone that's not a trauma, a person that's experienced trauma, they'd be like, why the hell you go into the same type of events that like cause you harm? On reflection, that was a way for me to claim back my narrative and to claim back my story, to claim back my power and be like, I can go to these places and still be safe and still use drugs. And guess what? I told you it was at one time. So I think sharing a story, being able to speak with you today, but I'm just this one person. I'm not the only person this has ever happened to, and I definitely won't be the last. So I think what's helped me is being able to speak with yous, but what we can do is collectively have these conversations with everyone, and that's how the seeds of change start. So thank you.
Round of applause for everyone.
Hi, my question was for all of the panel. But when we talk about consent, I feel like often we really talk about it as like that individualized like responsibility, or identifying it, or identifying when your consent has been breached. And given your different like positionalities, do you think that the police, individual officers, are actually able to identify that and support people when it has been? Are they equipped well enough to, support people when consent has been breached?
I think it's getting better because we're here to educate them. So I would like to think, I know this isn't the case for everyone, but if someone is reporting, I know banging on about ISVAs, but it's really important because that ISVA is there to help that officer understand, because it isn't a well-known situation, is it? Especially for police, that they can be behind the times a little bit. So I think us as services, as individuals, it's our job to educate and to keep the education going. So yeah, I think having an ISVA in your corner when you are reporting just supports that.